Today, we're going to dive into something called Progressive Muscular Atrophy, or PMA for short. Now, this is a condition that really gets to the core of how we move. So we're going to break down exactly what happens when the body's final command to a muscle just starts to fail.
I mean, really think about it for a second. You decide you want to pick up your coffee mug. That's a thought, right? It starts up in your brain, but it has to travel all the way down to your hand. How does that final, critical message actually get delivered? It's a journey we all take for granted thousands of times every single day.
Well, that journey from a thought to an action, it follows a really clear path. It all starts with the signal in the brain, which zips down the spinal cord, and then it hits this crucial handoff point, the lower motor neuron. You can think of this neuron as the final messenger. It's the one that takes the order and delivers that final jolt directly to the muscle, telling it, okay, contract now. Without that last step, a thought just stays a thought. Nothing happens.
So let's zoom in on that final messenger, because honestly, it's the main character in our story today. Understanding the lower motor neuron, or LMN as we'll call it, is absolutely the key to understanding PMA.
Now look at that phrase right there, final common pathway. That's not just some fancy description, it's a huge concept. What it means is that every single voluntary thing you do, from blinking your eyes to sprinting, has to pass through these LMNs. They are literally the only way out for the signal. So you can imagine, if they start to fail, the connection is cut. The muscle loses its nerve supply, and the brain's command just goes nowhere.
And that brings us right to progressive muscular atrophy. PMA is, at its heart, the disease where this very specific system, this final messenger service, begins to break down.
Okay, here it is, the core definition. PMA is the degeneration of those lower motor neurons without the early involvement of the upper motor neurons up in the brain. I really want you to focus on that one word, without. It is the single most important distinction when you're first looking at this disease, especially when you compare it to its more famous relative, ALS.
So because this disease is so specific in its early days, hitting only those lower motor neurons, it produces a really distinct set of symptoms. You can think of these as the direct, observable evidence that the final command just isn't getting delivered.
All right, let's walk through these. First, you get flaccid weakness. This means the muscle feels heavy, kind of floppy, almost like dead weight, not stiff. Then there's muscle atrophy. This one's pretty direct. Since the muscle isn't getting that nerve input, it literally starts to shrink. You can actually see it wasting away. Fasciculations. Those are those strange, ripple-like twitches you can sometimes see under the skin. That's the sign of an irritated, dying nerve. And finally, your reflexes get weaker or just disappear completely because that whole circuit is broken.
This is such a critical point to understand. It completely reframes what's happening. The muscle wasting you see in PMA isn't happening because someone isn't trying to use their muscles or because they're not exercising. It is a direct biological result of the neuron failing. It's a neurogenic process, plain and simple.
Okay, now here's where things get really interesting. In medicine, sometimes what isn't there is just as important as what is there. And when it comes to diagnosing PMA, the absence of certain signs is a massive clue. And here they are. These signs, spasticity, stiffness, exaggerated or super brisk reflexes, these are the classic signs of upper motor neuron trouble, the signals coming down from the brain. In early PMA, you just don't see this stuff. The muscles feel soft and weak, not tight and weak. This is the other side of the diagnostic coin, and it's just as important.
And here's that contrast laid out side by side. It makes it so clear, right? On the left, you've got that pure LMN picture of early PMA, soft, heavy weakness with weak or absent reflexes. But then on the right, you have the mixed picture you often see in classic ALS, a stiff, spastic kind of weakness, but with reflexes that are actually exaggerated. It's a completely different physical feeling, a whole different experience.
So does this mean they're totally separate diseases? Well, not exactly. The way we understand it now is that these conditions all exist on a spectrum, a continuum of motor neuron disease.
And this right here is an absolutely crucial concept. For some people, a diagnosis that starts out as pure PMA can actually evolve. Over time, those upper motor neuron signs we just talked about, the ones that were missing at the beginning, they can start to show up. And when that happens, the diagnosis actually shifts to classic ALS. This just reinforces the idea that these conditions are all biologically linked.
This visual really lays it all out. Think about it like this. At one end of the spectrum, you've got conditions that only affect the upper motor neurons,
At the complete other end, where PMA sits, it's all about the lower motor neurons. And smack dab in the middle, you've got classic ALS, which is a mix of both. They're all just different clinical flavors of the same underlying problem.
So you might be asking yourself, okay, if they're all on a spectrum and the diagnosis can even change, why is it so important to make this distinction between PMA and ALS, especially early on?
Well, it matters for some very real, very practical reasons. Getting that initial diagnosis right helps everyone, the person with the condition, their family, understand what to expect. It helps doctors correctly interpret what they're seeing on the physical exam, know what signs to monitor for over time, and, maybe most importantly, it allows for more accurate discussions about prognosis, which can be different from classic ALS, especially in the first few years.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Our ability to move, something we do without thinking, is built on this incredibly precise architecture, this chain of command. In progressive muscular atrophy, we see what happens when that structure fails, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. It's when that final messenger, the one that turns our intention into actual action, is the very first to fall silent.